She was a widow, poor and a foreigner, and yet she became part of the genealogy of the Son of God. Sounds unlikely. It is. But that's exactly the kind of unlikely story God turns into a leading role. While many people are busy trying to look perfect just to be accepted, Ruth did only one thing. She stayed faithful. And it was that quiet, steady faithfulness that placed her in the most important story ever told. She wasn't an Israelite, didn't come from a famous family, had no powerful connections, but she had something heaven values more than any resume: a loyal heart, full of courage and willing to start over. In this video, you'll find out why Ruth's story isn't just beautiful, it's dangerous. Yes, dangerous is because it breaks every religious and social rule of her time. It shows us that God prefers broken hearts over perfect masks. That a woman who's been rejected can become the mother of a promise, and that your origin doesn't get to decide your future. If you've ever felt small, out of place, or unseen by those who should have noticed you, this story is for you. And by the end, you might realize that maybe, just maybe, God's plan has always been to turn your pain into a bridge towards something eternal. The hunger in Bethlehem wasn't just about the lack of bread. It was about a loss of purpose, the feeling of no direction, the breakdown of a daily life that once felt like it was enough. Bethlehem, ironically called the House of Bread, now had empty tables. Imagine a father looking into the tired, hollow eyes of his children, waiting for provision that no longer came from the land they had always called home. That's the moment when Elimelech made a choice many people avoid. He decided to leave, to change his surroundings, to start a new chapter. And how many times in life do we find ourselves standing in that same kind of turning point? Making a decision under pressure is one of the hardest things a person can do. It tests not only your faith, but also your character. Elimelech didn't run away. He chose to act. And in moments like these, acting becomes a valuable word. Moab was a foreign land, with a different culture, unfamiliar gods and unfriendly traditions. But they had food. And sometimes survival speaks louder than comfort. How many parents today in the 21st century cross borders with children in their arms and courage in their hearts? History repeats itself. Only the faces and places change, while the pain remains familiar. Scarcity has a cruel way of pushing us to face the very things we've tried to ignore. When times are good, it's easy to look like we've got it all together. But it's in moments of lack that we discover who we really are. Elimelech could have blamed the system, the weather, the neighbors, or even God. But instead, he took his wife and sons and left. It's like someone looking at an empty bank account and instead of complaining, starts selling cakes in jars or working delivery apps. Is it easy? Not at all. But is it honorable? Definitely. It's worth noting that Moab wasn't an ideal place. It was just what was available. And that's where a powerful truth lies. Not every open door will be pretty, but it might be necessary. Not every solution feels perfect, but it might be the one that works. Elimelech teaches us that the right way forward isn't always the ideal one. Sometimes it's simply the possible one. And often that possible path leads to a story we never imagined living. His decision also reveals something deep about leadership. It demands sacrifice. He didn't leave because of pride or ambition. He left because of love. And that teaches us something important. In hard times, our focus needs to shift from ourselves to those who count on us. Today, a leader in a home might be a young man who puts college on hold to support his siblings, or a woman who pauses a personal dream to care for aging parents. The sense of responsibility Elimelech carried feels more real than ever in today's world. Even without any promises or guarantees, he went. And here's something we need to remember. Faith isn't always about standing still and waiting for a miracle. Sometimes it's about walking into the unknown with a heart full of trust. Moab was a land of old enemies for Israel, but in that moment, it became a shelter. That challenges our religious pride and reminds us that yes, God can provide even in unexpected places. The same is true for you. Your Moab might be a new job, a difficult reconciliation, or a tough season that feels uncomfortable. But maybe it's exactly where the way out begins. And isn't it curious how some of the greatest redemption stories begin in places of pain? If Bethlehem had been doing fine, Ruth would never have entered the picture. If there had been abundance, maybe there would have been no need to move. Sometimes it's only when we hit rock bottom that we finally see the ladder. Elimelech left the house of bread with no bread, but with faith. And that faith, even in a time of scarcity, moved the story forward. It may sound contradictory, but that's exactly where the story of grace begins. What nobody expected was that this small, fearful step would open the door to something amazing. Moab seemed like just a temporary shelter, but it became the starting point of one of the most beautiful redemption stories ever told. And like any powerful story, the first chapters are filled with crisis, not triumph. But right there, in the middle of the chaos, new characters show up, new connections are made, and an unexpected love story starts to unfold. Life in Moab brought a break from the pain of scarcity, but it didn't take away the challenges that were yet to come. Mahlon and Chilion, Elimelech's sons, grew up on this new soil and, as often happens, built bonds with Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. This wasn't just about love, it was about adapting, connecting, and surviving emotionally. It's like when someone moves to a new country and little by little falls in love with what once felt foreign. The heart opens to the unexpected, and God works even in the meetings that seem unlikely. At first glance, marrying Moabite women might have looked like a cultural betrayal. After all, Moabites weren't exactly Israel's favorite neighbors. But real life rarely follows golden-covered religious manuals. Sometimes love grows in places no one would expect, and that's where grace shows its beauty. When two worlds collide and, instead of conflict, there's connection, something sacred happens. How many people today marry outside the boxes society approves of and still build strong, loving homes? Ruth and Orpah joined the family like puzzle pieces that didn't seem to fit at first. They were from a different culture, a different people, with different ways. But daily life breaks down walls that prejudice builds. Time, when nurtured with respect, turns strangers into family. And that's a key to any lasting relationship. It's not just about marrying someone you know. It's about choosing to truly know the one you married. A healthy home takes flexibility and willingness to grow. Imagine how that family's daily life changed. Celebrations with unfamiliar rituals, meals with new flavors, words with strange pronunciations, and yet they became a family. This reminds us of something powerful. Real relationships require letting go of certainty. Not every tradition matters more than peace. Not every difference needs to lead to conflict. Sometimes you have to unlearn to truly love. Think of modern examples, interracial, interfaith, or intercultural couples who overcome judgment and build something lasting together. The Bible doesn't go into the details of these marriages, but the presence of Ruth and Orpah in the story shows they left a mark. The path of the story could have been entirely different without these unions. What seemed like ordinary marriages became a turning point for redemption. That teaches us something important. Even decisions that don't look spiritual, like who you marry, can carry a divine purpose. What if that door you think is too ordinary is actually a sacred bridge? There's another detail worth noticing. Ruth and Orpah living in an Israelite home must have challenged both of them. It wasn't just about adapting outwardly, it was about inward change too. They were introduced to a different God, different customs, a whole new way of living faith. How many people today enter a relationship and go through that kind of deep transformation? Dating someone with strong faith can be exactly the push someone needs for a personal breakthrough, but that only happens when mutual respect is present. It's also important to highlight Naomi's role. She was a mother-in-law, but became a maternal figure. Instead of pushing them away, she welcomed them in. That says a lot about her wisdom and the kind of environment she helped build. In a time when mothers-in-law are often portrayed as rivals, Naomi stands out as a mentor. And what a difference it makes when a mother-in-law builds instead of competes. If you're a mother, think about this. Your influence might shape the spiritual future of your daughter-in-law or son-in-law. These marriages weren't just the joining of two hearts. They were the merging of two plans, one human, one divine. In Moab, where famine gave way to bread and grief was just around the corner. The bonds formed between these young people planted seeds that would one day change the world. But like every powerful story, the path to transformation came at a cost. Because even true relationships must pass through the fire of loss. Grief came like a strong wind, without asking for permission. Elimelech died, then Mahlon, then Chilion. In a short period of time, Naomi went from being a wife and mother to a woman completely alone in a foreign land, surrounded only by her daughters-in-law. There's no way to measure the weight of that kind of pain. She had left her homeland in search of bread, and instead she found the bitterness of mourning. And when mourning strikes 3 times, silence feels heavier than stone. It's no surprise that people often don't know what to say to someone who's grieving, because truthfully, there are no words that can fully comfort a broken heart. Naomi went through the kind of pain most people are afraid to even imagine, losing a husband and 2 sons, and yet she still had to breathe to go on. This same pain is seen today in mothers who bury children after tragic accidents, in women who say goodbye to husbands after long battles with illness. Grief doesn't choose race, class, or religion. There's something powerful in this story. Even good people face tragedy. There's no secret formula that shields anyone from life's pain. Faith isn't a shield against tears. It's the strength to keep going through them. What sustains someone like Naomi in the middle of so much loss isn't just what she believes, but how she lives out that belief. And maybe that's the part we overlook the most today. Spirituality is not magic. It's roots. If you look closely, the Bible doesn't dramatize the funerals, but it also doesn't minimize the pain. It simply shows the raw reality. And that alone teaches us something. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone in pain is not try to explain, just be there, just listen, just don't walk away. That's what Ruth and Orpah did. They didn't have answers, but they had presence, and in the real world, that kind of presence is a miracle. Have you ever tried being that kind of miracle in someone's life? It's interesting that even in her sorrow, Naomi didn't send her daughters-in-law away right away. Maybe it's because deep pain needs connection to avoid becoming unbearable. There's wisdom in that. Don't isolate yourself when everything seems to fall apart. Our natural instinct is to withdraw, but emotional isolation is like salt on an open wound. If you're going through grief, seek out a group, a friend, even a counselor. Practical example, groups like Mothers Who Pray for Their Children or church grief support programs can become real bridges to healing. The death of Elimelech and his sons also closes a chapter, the chapter of human plans. Everything that had been predictable, organized, and planned out came to an end. Now Naomi steps into a new stage where only divine provision can write the next part of the story. And it's the same with us. When everything we could do has been done, it's time to trust what we can't see. And that's not being passive, it's being mature. Ruth and Orpah, even though they were foreigners, stayed by Naomi's side. That shows us something important. True love doesn't depend on blood. Today, many people confuse family with genetic ties. But those who care, who listen, who stay, they are family. A practical lesson. Value the people who are close to you in your pain. Stop chasing those who left and start honoring those who stayed. Sometimes a daughter-in-law is more like a daughter than a daughter, and a friend can be more of a sister than your own brother. Still, even in this dark chapter, the story holds a spark of hope, because even in loss, God plants the path forward, and Naomi's next step, though she doesn't know it yet, will be a return, not just to her land, but to a purpose she never imagined. Because when everything seems over, that's often when the real story begins to take shape again. In the midst of grief and a foreign land, a piece of news reached Naomi like a gentle breeze. There was bread again in Bethlehem. That simple sentence stirred something she thought was long gone: hope. It wasn't a prophecy, nor a heavenly vision. It was practical information, and here's the lesson. Sometimes God's answer comes as a fact, a comment, a casual conversation. We need spiritual sensitivity to recognize when it's time to go back. Naomi's return wasn't an escape, it was a conscious decision. She wasn't leaving because of lack anymore. She was returning because of promise. And that changes everything. It's different to run from something than to run towards something. She was going back to Bethlehem not with a husband or sons, but with her story, her scars, and the maturity that came from loss. She was a different woman now. And that new version of herself needed a new beginning. How many times in life is the way back not a defeat, but a rescue? Going back can be an act of courage. Some people need to return to the faith they walked away from, to the purpose they forgot, to the home they neglected. Naomi teaches us that it's never too late to begin again, even with empty hands. In fact, most true new beginnings are born out of scarcity, not abundance. What's powerful is that she heard the news, thought it through, and moved. So many people stay paralyzed even after hearing, "There's bread again." The fear of starting over freezes them. The shame of returning weighs them down. But Naomi didn't let pride keep her from moving. And what about you? Is there a Bethlehem in your life, a place where God is already working, but you're still stuck in Moab out of fear? If so, maybe it's time to get up and go. Even while carrying the pain of deep loss, she chose to walk. And that reveals a powerful spiritual principle. Faith is not the absence of pain. It's moving forward in spite of it. Maybe Naomi didn't know what she would do once she got to Bethlehem, but she knew she couldn't stay where she was. And often that's all God is waiting for, one step. Like someone who decides to leave an addiction behind, even without knowing what tomorrow looks like. That first step is already part of the healing. She invited Ruth and Orpah to come with her, and here we see how her decisions were already influencing other lives. Naomi was a quiet example of strength, and that's how life works. You may not realize it, but someone is watching you to decide whether to keep going or give up. Your faith, your choices, your actions, they all echo. That's why real people don't live only for themselves. They leave traces of courage wherever they go. The journey back to Bethlehem is full of symbolism. She left because of hunger. Now she's returning, marked by grief. But in both cases, her motivation is the same: survival. This time, though, the nourishment she's seeking isn't just physical. It's spiritual. She's longing for healing, belonging, comfort. And that teaches us something important. There are seasons in life when results aren't enough. You need meaning. And the most beautiful part is this. She didn't know it yet, but her decision to return would change not only her story, but the story of humanity. Because her new beginning would become the soil where something far greater could grow. But, like every true journey, not everyone would continue walking with her on the way back. It was along the road that the tension came to the surface. Naomi, fully aware of the weight she was carrying, turned to her daughters-in-law and said, "Go back. You still have time to rebuild your lives." She didn't want to drag them into a land where they could be rejected, labeled, or even hated. It was an act of love. A rare kind of love, the kind that lets go, even when it hurts. And how many times, like Naomi, are we called to release the ones we love? Orpah, after tears and farewells, chose to return. And we shouldn't judge her for it. She did what seemed logical. She had a home, a people, her gods. She went back to where there were more human chances of starting over. And honestly, many would have done the same. Who hasn't chosen the safer path when their soul was in pieces? What Orpah did wasn't wrong. It was human. And that already teaches us something. Not every departure is abandonment. Sometimes it's just fear. But Ruth stayed. And that staying changed everything. Instead of following the natural path, she chose the unlikely one. And not just for her mother-in-law. Ruth declared, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." That wasn't just affection, it was covenant. Ruth wasn't just walking to Bethlehem, she was breaking with her old identity to embrace a new destiny, like someone who leaves everything behind to follow an invisible calling, with no promises of safety, only faith. How many people today make decisions like Ruth? Very few. Most are looking for shortcuts, guarantees, exit clauses. Ruth didn't ask for conditions. She didn't say, "What if this doesn't work?" She simply went. And that kind of loyalty is what's missing in many relationships, projects, churches. Standing by someone not out of duty, but from conviction. That is revolutionary and deeply transformative. Ruth's choice also shows us that true love is made of conscious decisions. It's not just about feelings. It's about staying, about being present when reason tells you to walk away, about saying I'm staying when it would be easier to leave. This applies to friendships, to marriages, to callings. And if you're at a crossroads today, ask yourself, are you acting like Orpah, with reason, or like Ruth, with faith? The world teaches us to protect ourselves, to leave before we break, to hold back. But Ruth teaches the opposite, to love even when it's risky. And don't think that's weakness. Quite the opposite. That kind of surrender takes courage from someone who knows who they are. When she says, "Where you go, I will go," she's really saying, I don't need control to stay. And that's rare as it is powerful. Naomi, after hearing Ruth's words, said nothing more. She simply accepted it. Because when someone chooses to stay without obligation, that love becomes undeniable. Ruth didn't have to go, she wanted to. And that reminds us of a powerful truth. The value of a bond is not in blood, but in commitment. So often it's someone outside your family who holds your hand when everyone else walks away. And there, in the middle of nowhere, two women, with no guarantees and no resources, decided to walk together into the unknown. A simple choice, but a powerful one. The kind of decision heaven sees and records. Because Ruth's faithfulness wouldn't just be honored, it would be written into the story of redemption. But that would only begin to unfold once they finally set foot again in Bethlehem. When Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, all eyes turned toward them. The town, small and watchful, murmured, "Is that Naomi?" It was, but not the same. The woman who left full had come back empty, marked by sorrow, and no longer saw herself the way she once did. She even said, "Don't call me Naomi, pleasant, call me Mara, bitter." That statement reveals something deep. She felt disfigured by pain. And anyone who has suffered deeply knows, some wounds aren't visible, but they leave scars on the inside. Ruth, standing beside her, may have felt the weight of those stares too. After all, she was a foreigner. And in such a rigid cultural setting, that alone was enough to spark suspicion. Imagine the discomfort. A new city, unfamiliar people, a different accent, unknown traditions. And still, she stayed. Loyalty has this quiet power to challenge labels. Even without being welcomed, she remained. And there's something powerful about that, choosing to belong before being accepted. How many times have you felt that, even when you're doing everything right, people still judge you for where you came from, how you speak, or what you've been through? Ruth understands. She was there not to impress but to serve, and often service comes before recognition. People like Ruth are the ones who make a difference behind the scenes, who clean the house without being praised, who support others quietly, who stay faithful even when no one is watching. As for Naomi, asking to be called Mara was a raw, emotional truth that many are afraid to admit. She didn't pretend to be okay, and that's rare. Today, we're pressured to smile while crumbling inside. But Naomi was honest about her pain. And that too is faith. Faith in a God who allows us to grieve. Have you ever allowed yourself to say, "I'm not okay today"? If not, maybe it's time. Because denying pain doesn't heal it, it just covers it with a mask. And even in her brokenness, Naomi returned to the place of promise. That teaches us something important. Faith doesn't cancel pain. Faith and sorrow can walk side by side. She knew she had to be back, even if she didn't have the strength to smile. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to reposition, even with a shattered heart. Go back to the place where God planted you, even if there are no flowers yet. Return with roots. Ruth, witnessing all of this, didn't back down. She realized it wouldn't be easy, but she didn't quit. Maybe in that moment she began to understand that her mission went beyond taking care of Naomi. She was carrying a promise that hadn't yet been revealed. And that's a powerful principle. When you remain faithful even without applause, you're being prepared for something greater. And that greater often begins in places of rejection. Their arrival in Bethlehem looked like an ending, but in truth, it was a new beginning. What no one saw was that this rejected foreigner would become a key part of a redemption story. The town saw a bitter widow and her outsider daughter-in-law. But God saw an eternal plan unfolding. Sometimes you might see yourself as what's left over, but you're actually part of something far bigger than you realize. And it's exactly in seasons of rejection, obscurity, and silence that the most unlikely opportunities are born. It was in Bethlehem, in the fields, in the routine of daily work that something began to shift. Because for those who remain, the ordinary becomes sacred. And in the very next scene, it is there, in the fields, that the story begins to turn. With no money, no inheritance, and no big expectations, Ruth decided to do what she could: work. It wasn't the best job. It wasn't glamorous. It meant picking up leftovers, the stalks that fell from the hands of the harvesters. But she didn't feel ashamed. She left early with steady feet and a willing heart. Some people wait for perfect conditions to take action. Ruth didn't. She acted with what she had. And that's a powerful lesson. Gleaning was a job for invisible people. It's the modern-day equivalent of collecting recyclables, doing elderly care by the day, or cleaning houses without a contract. But she did it with dignity. And here's where the miracle lies. God doesn't bless the status of the work. He blesses the posture of the heart. Ruth wasn't looking for recognition. She was looking for provision. And right there, bent over between straw and sweat, someone important began to notice her. Boaz was a man of wealth, influence, and he owned the field where Ruth was working. He noticed her, not because of her looks, but because of her attitude. He asked who she was, and his workers told him that she had arrived early, worked without stopping, didn't complain, and followed the rules. Ruth was noticed not for what she said, but for what she did. And that's pure gold. Your reputation is being built when you think no one's watching. Today, a lot of people want visibility before consistency, but God often blesses what's done faithfully in secret. Ruth was being tested, and she didn't even know it. And what about you? Could it be that the hard season you're living through is exactly what's preparing you for something greater? While you're out there picking leftovers, heaven is watching your discipline, your devotion, your attitude, like a boss silently evaluating an intern before offering the full-time position. There's another beautiful detail here. Ruth didn't sit around waiting for Naomi to solve everything. She took initiative, and that's maturity. When we go through hard times, we have two options: complain or respond. Ruth responded. No excuses, no laziness, no drama. She simply did what could be done. And that's more inspiring than any motivational speech, because some days just getting up and moving forward is already a victory. Even as a foreigner, she respected the rules of the field. She didn't take more than allowed. She didn't cut in line. She didn't demand special treatment. She simply worked with humility. And that humility opened doors. Because real doors don't open through pressure. They open through honor. What Ruth experienced in that field reflects what Jesus later taught. Whoever humbles themselves will be exalted. But you have to first be willing to take the servant's place. Ruth had no idea that the field she was gleaning in would one day become her inheritance. And that shows us something prophetic. The place you serve today might be the place you lead tomorrow. God turns effort into legacy, but never without a process. Ruth gathered grain before she gathered honor. She worked in silence before receiving affection. She served before being seen. That's how God works. And then Boaz didn't just see her, he acted. Because when you sow with integrity, you attract the right harvest. What seemed like just another hard day in the field was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Because Ruth's heart, faithful and steady, was about to receive more than just leftovers. She was about to experience generosity. Boaz wasn't just a wealthy man, he was a righteous one. And righteousness in this case didn't mean cold legal correctness, but compassion in action. When he noticed Ruth, he didn't just admire her from a distance. He approached her, spoke with her kindly, ensured her safety in the field, and gave his workers clear instructions. Let extra stalks fall for her. And here we learn something vital. True generosity isn't about charity, it's about dignity. He didn't make a show of it, didn't place Ruth at the center like some trophy of his kindness. He simply cared. That's emotional maturity. In a world where good deeds are often posted for likes, Boaz acted quietly. He saw value where others saw just a Moabite. That's the mark of a true leader, to treat with respect those beneath you, even when no one is watching. Ruth, used to living off leftovers, was stunned by such kindness. She even asked, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, though I'm a foreigner?" Her humility only highlighted Boaz's generosity even more. And that exchange between them reveals something profound. When kindness meets gratitude, a bond forms that goes beyond personal gain. It's like when someone helps you without expecting anything in return. And somehow, their gesture carries a touch of heaven. Boaz also offered food to Ruth, not leftovers, a place at the table. And that's deeply symbolic. She, who had been gathering from the edges, was now invited to sit and eat. How many people today are in that place? Working hard, living on the margins, quietly hoping for the day they'll be seen, called in, truly valued. And if you're someone like Boaz, maybe your act of kindness today is the very answer to someone's silent prayer. There's a practical message here too. Boaz used what he had to do good. He owned land, so he opened his field. And you, with what God has given you, what are you doing? If you're a good listener, offer your attention. If you have a home, offer coffee. If you have resources, be generous. Sometimes even a small field is enough to change someone's life. Boaz didn't rescue Ruth. He simply did what was right, and that was enough to change everything. Boaz's generosity wasn't just a one-time gesture. It was consistent. He told her she could come back, harvest whenever she needed, and that she would be safe. That's commitment. It's no use giving something today and disappearing tomorrow. The world is full of empty good intentions, but those who are like Boaz follow through. And that kind of consistency is what builds trust. Whether in friendship, work, or love, consistency means more than intensity. And even more beautiful, Boaz didn't treat Ruth like a charity case, but like a woman of honor. He recognized her character, her loyalty to Naomi, her courage. He looked beyond her background and past. And that's something we need to reclaim. The world judges by labels, but God, and just men, look at the heart. If you're a leader, business owner, pastor, or someone with influence, learn from Boaz. Honor the ones no one else is honoring. There in the field, something began. Something even they didn't fully understand yet. Because when generosity meets integrity, it plants a seed of redemption. And that seed was about to be watered by an even bolder act. A request that would change not just Ruth's destiny, but the course of an entire lineage. After so many days of work, humility, and silence, Naomi guides Ruth with a bold plan. Go to Boaz and ask him to fulfill the role of kinsman redeemer. It may sound strange to modern ears, but in the culture of Israel, this was a legitimate and honorable gesture. The redeemer was a relative who could restore the land, the family name, and even the future. In other words, Ruth was about to move from the role of servant to heir of a promise. The scene is full of symbolism. Ruth goes to the threshing floor where the grain was being separated. There, after Boaz lies down, she approaches and covers his feet with his cloak, a gesture asking for covering and protection. This act carried deep meaning. It wasn't seduction, it was honor. She was saying through that gesture, cover me, include me, redeem me. It's like someone today saying, accept my story, see me as part of your purpose. And once again, Boaz shows his integrity. He doesn't take advantage of her. He doesn't shame her. He doesn't expose her. He listens. And he responds with kindness, blessed are you, my daughter. More than just accepting the request, he honors Ruth's heart. Boaz understood that moment wasn't just between the two of them. It was sacred. Because when someone comes to you in faith and vulnerability, the only worthy response is covering, not judgment. But there was a detail. There was another relative, closer in line, who by law had the first right to redeem Elimelech's inheritance. Boaz could have ignored that, but he didn't. He chose to follow the law, even if it meant giving up Ruth. And here we see the difference between impulse and character. People with character would rather lose something for the sake of justice than gain it through shortcuts. Boaz gathered the elders, presented the case, and gave the other man the opportunity. The man backed out when he realized redeeming the land also meant marrying Ruth. He wasn't willing to take the risk. So Boaz stood up and declared before everyone, I will redeem her. And in that moment, What was once vulnerability turned into honor. The rejected foreigner became the wife of a righteous man. What once felt like loss became legacy. What was once a leftover became a root. This process teaches us so much about healthy relationships. Before making promises, Boaz consulted the law. Before taking responsibility, he brought everything into the light. That's maturity. Real love doesn't hide, doesn't rush, doesn't skip steps. It does things the right way. The world today is quick to fall in love, but slow to commit. Boaz did the opposite. He loved with patience but committed with strength, and that's how lasting things are built. Ruth's request also teaches us about courage, because asking for help, especially at that level, is an act of faith. Today, many people would rather suffer in silence than show vulnerability. But Ruth reminds us, when you trust the right person, exposing your pain can lead to restoration. If you're going through a crisis, choose wisely where you place your trust, but don't keep everything to yourself. Sometimes your redemption begins with a single honest conversation. Now the scene shifts. Ruth, who once gathered leftovers, is being redeemed by someone who honors her. Boaz, who once watched from a distance, now steps forward to make his commitment public. And this marriage, born out of faith, honor, and loyalty, becomes the bridge to something far greater. Because when God redeems, He doesn't just restore your past, He writes a whole new future. Boaz and Ruth got married, and it wasn't just the union of two hearts. It was the weaving of a lineage. The people rejoiced, the elders spoke blessings, and soon came the fruit of that covenant, Obed. And a boy who looked ordinary in the eyes of the world, but extraordinary in the eyes of heaven. Obed became the father of Jesse, who became the father of David, the king. And David, well, from him would come the Messiah, the Savior, the one who would bring redemption not just to one family but to all of humanity. Ruth, the rejected Moabite, was now part of the lineage of Christ. That's revolutionary. A foreign woman with no Israelite pedigree, no religious status, nothing the system valued, but everything heaven looks for: faith, loyalty, and courage. And that teaches us this: God doesn't choose the way people do. He looks at the heart. He honors those who honor. And He turns the unlikely into history makers. The birth of Obed was more than a family moment. It was the fulfillment of destiny. Ruth's story started with loss, hunger, and grief. But it ended with covenant, honor, and legacy. That shows us God's ending is not the same as man's ending. When it seems like the story is over, God may simply be turning the page. And maybe in your life, He's about to do just that. This marriage also teaches us about the power of new beginnings. Neither Ruth nor Boaz were at the start of their lives. She was a widow. He had lived through much already. But both decided it wasn't too late to love, to serve, and to build something meaningful. Some people think life ends at 30 or 40 or 60. But with God, there's always time to rewrite the story. What matters is not where you start, it's who you become along the way. Imagine what would have happened to David without Obed, and to Obed without Ruth, and to Ruth if she had stayed in Moab. One choice changed everything, and that reminds us that seemingly small decisions can carry massive destinies. So don't underestimate your faithfulness. What you're doing today, even if it feels small, might be building the bridge to God's eternal plan. It's incredible to think that out of all the names God could have included, He chose to write Ruth's name into the genealogy of Jesus. There she is, recorded in Matthew 1 among men, kings, and prophets. That's no small detail. It's God's signature saying, "I see value in the ones the world overlooks." That means your story, even if it's full of broken chapters, can still be remembered for generations if it's lived with purpose. The marriage of Ruth and Boaz was more than love. It was mission. And a shared mission always bears more fruit. A couple aligned with heaven is stronger than any storm. Maybe you're still waiting for this. Someone who understands that love isn't just a feeling, it's legacy. Don't settle for shallow relationships. Pray for connections that change the world. Like Ruth and Boaz, like Obed and Jesse, like David and the throne of God. In the end, Ruth wasn't just redeemed, she became part of the Redeemer. Her lineage would become the cradle of Christ Himself. And it all began with one act of faith long ago when she said, "Where you go, I will go." Because sometimes a single sentence of true love carries the weight of eternity. Now stop for a moment and think, how many times have you believed you weren't enough? That your story was too small, too broken, or too late? Maybe you've grown used to living on the margins, picking up the leftovers of life, hoping things might change, but not really believing that God could do something big with what little you have left. Ruth's story shatters all of those thoughts. She had no title, no resources, no right name. She was a widow, a foreigner, rejected. And yet she chose to love, to serve, and to stay. Not because she knew how the story would end, but because she trusted the character of God, even in the silence. And it's exactly that kind of posture that changes everything. When the world says, "She has nothing," heaven replies, "She has everything I'm looking for." So now I ask you, honestly, are you still going to believe you have to be perfect to be chosen? Will you keep letting the shame of your past stop you from stepping into your purpose? Or maybe it's time to do what Ruth did, to take a step of faith even without guarantees, and trust that the same God who redeems stories can rewrite yours too. If this message spoke to your heart in any way, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below saying, "I am like Ruth." Let's build a community of people who, even from unlikely places, have chosen to stay faithful until God's purpose unfolds. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications. There are so many real and life-changing stories coming your way, and I want you right here with me for every step of the journey.